more marginal soils where they need those, where they have those more droughty soils, those more stressy environments. And they're saying, what American technology is going to help us improve our yields on those acres?
When we did the 301 tariffs about 5-6 years ago, what I heard from Wisconsin farmers, by the way, very disorienting to be on a farm and not see cows or smell cows, because that's all I know in Northeast Wisconsin. We have more cows than people in a lot of counties that I represent, but I'm getting used to it. So
we can take you to a cattle farm later if you want, Mike.
That just would help me.
One right down the road.
At home.
That's a moving comment.
There we go.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
Well done. Now I've lost my train. Oh, the sentiment from farmers in my district was, okay, economically this is not great in terms of my bottom line, but I understand, we're going to have to endure some short-term pain to rebalance our economic relationship with China over the long term. Quite honestly, I heard just as many complaints about the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, because a lot of that goes into vehicles and parts and things you need to operate a farm. Just give me the unvarnished view from an Iowa farmer on the 301, 232 tariffs. You mentioned reciprocal tariff reduction. I forget the phrase you used, Suzanne. How should we think about that going forward?
You want to say something?
No, you go ahead.
I think to your point, what you heard from your farmers is what farmers are saying around here. Let's do some short-term pain for long-term gain. That's for sure. Let's not, and back to Suzanne's point, let's think about the unintended consequences of legislation, and back to Ashley's point as well. How do we kind of work together to find the happy medium here without doing too much damage? I don't know if you want to expand on that.
That's exactly right. Prior to the trade war or tariff war, we were 35% of our soybeans going to China. During that, in 2018, we dropped down to 12.5% of our soybeans going to China. You cannot handle that as a farmer on narrow, thin margins. Now we're back up to that point. But okay, so that was in 2018 and we're 23, so that's 5 years it took us to get back to that point. So, like Will said, we thought, early on, short pain for gain, and we need to see that more now.
It should be noted that correct me if I'm wrong, under the terms of the Phase 1 trade deal that the Trump administration struck with China, they pledged to increase their purchases of U.S. exports by about $200 billion. That didn't happen. That was like so many CCP promises, an empty promise. And as a consequence, I think a lot of farmers are suffering.
Well, can I ask a question about just top of my mind, a couple of things I want to just ask you. So we are not presidential candidates, but I suspect that you
might make a big announcement right here, Raj. Although, wait, Democrats don't do Iowa first anymore.
Well, we have a president already.
Right, yeah.
We don't need to elect another Democrat.
Spice this up.
So if you had the Republican presidential candidates here, what's the number one thing that you would ask them to do? And I'm sure you've already talked to them. Probably you've talked to several of them at this point, but is there something that maybe we are not familiar with that maybe you've asked them to consider if they become president, or President Biden, whoever? The second is ethanol. I just wanted to ask about ethanol briefly, and your thoughts about how does ethanol play into this relationship with China? If you could address those two things.
Lori, go ahead. Your ethanol.
We could probably get one of the. There's probably a few of them wandering around the street down there. We could probably bring them in and ask them directly. Yeah.
Where's Mike Pence?
Yeah, Mike Pence.
First, if I could circle back to your original question earlier, one thing we didn't mention, we talked about planting the quality seed and the biotechnology and intellectual property that goes into having that quality seed. I think soybeans are about 2% more higher in protein value just than the Chinese soybean seed.
2%?
I think so.
Okay.
That would need to be fact checked. But the other thing is, and we mentioned this combine, but we have access to very efficient equipment. It does a lot of things. More efficient than, it's mind-boggling. And most people don't even recognize the cleaning power of that. He mentioned clean seed, but it starts from the bag
And then also we need clean seed to go into these corn bins, because the other part of the equation is we know how to store the grain such that it stays in good quality. And I think that that's what some underdeveloped nations really fall on, is that end piece that's not thought about. But how do you keep that grain in good condition? And it has to be clean, it has to be dry, it has to be stored appropriately. And the American farmers are very good at that.
How important is biosecurity to the future of the agriculture industry? And when you look at, malign actors and what they may choose to do, obviously we talk about our food supply and protecting that. But our supply chain could be incredibly vulnerable if there was some sort of a researched and developed bio attack on our food supply. Do you think about that? Does that keep you up at night? And maybe, Will, you can talk a little bit about the advancements in seed that could help prevent and protect against something like that.
It's terrifying. I mean, yes, I've had some nightmares about such situations. To tell a side story real quick. I mean, back in the 70s in the seed industry, there was a technology that came in that helped sterilize seed corn, so you didn't have to detassel it. But then it restored it, so when it went to the farmers, you still had the pollen and the silk, and you could still make an ear of corn. But you didn't have to go to that extra labor of putting people through the field to remove the tassels in corn production. Because that technology was so successful, the genetic pool got so pushed into that cytoplasm, and then a blight came in and just decimated the industry. And that wasn't on purpose. It just happened, So we've seen a precedent of something like that really affecting the industry and destroying yields. And very quickly, the industry got away from it. I think the key is genetic diversity, and not allowing the cytoplasm and the technology to be in the hands of just a few big players and it all gets whittled down. Encouraging other companies, well, we could go into a whole lot of things here, but essentially encouraging more research and development from smaller independent companies as well. We talk about GM and how expensive it is and how much time it takes to get to market. Gene editing, the newer technology we're using now, is a little more cost effective and allows more players to get into it. The regulation's not as long. So there's a lot more opportunity to spread our diversity. So if we did have something come in, we could hopefully adapt and move pretty quickly. I think the other way you learn and protect yourselves from things like that is investment in land-grant universities, extension programs who are out there doing the research and saying, what are these new diseases or new pests that could be coming to hurt us, and what do we do about it? For example, right now, soybean gall midge is moving across to Iowa slowly, a few counties every year, and we're not really sure how to deal with it yet. The extension programs, the Iowa Soybean Association is working really hard to figure it out, but it's things like that we need a diverse portfolio of products to be able to say, well, maybe there's certain varieties that are more resistant to that pest or this disease. So I think just to encompass that, to protect from that, having not all our eggs in one basket, but funding multiple different avenues of research and development.
Well, and that goes beyond just obviously what we're putting in our fields. It's our animals too, right? And you think about Iowa's pork producing industry. You may have more cows than people in Wisconsin. We definitely have more pigs than people in Iowa. And we grow the best pork in the country and in the world. And you think about African swine fever. It actually decimated China a few years ago and decimated their pork supply. Avian influenza. We saw what that did to our poultry industry. Iowa obviously produces millions and millions of eggs. I was just at a Cargill facility earlier this week, and they go through 5 million eggs a day to produce, those little egg patties that we all eat on our breakfast sandwiches. So you think about the true impact of protecting biosecurity and continuing to innovate in that space. I think that's one way where we talk about being competitive with China, right? That's the goal of our committee, is how can we continue to support American innovation and be competitive? I think that's one place where solidifying, covering our bases and making sure we're ready for the next thing is part of that innovation.
Can I ask a question? It may be a little bit of a distraction, but I think it gets to the core of our competitiveness. And if you think about, what is ultimately our competitive advantage relative to China? I would say it's our free society, right? If we compete with China on top down versus top down, we will lose. Our strength is bottom up. It's just, Americans innovating, working hard, and figuring things out. That's sort of the American idea. one thing that worries me, at least as I talk to not just farmers, but businesses in my district in Northeast Wisconsin. Actually, well, I'll talk to most businesses that have been started in Northeast Wisconsin, and almost without fail, when I ask them the story of how it got started, the first thing they'll say, the first thing they'll say to me about their background? Take a guess.
I
Grew
used
up in
to farm.
Iowa.
I grew up on a farm.
Okay.
I grew up working on a farm, and as a result, in Illinois, yeah, that's right. And I fled Illinois.
Friendly fire.
But it's the farm work ethic, right? It's you get up early every day, you bust your butt, and you figure it out. But increasingly, I wonder if the educational system is producing that. We've seen farm consolidation in my district. I'm not sure ag is as attractive to that young Wisconsinite as it once was. How do we change that? What does our educational system need to do to be part of this, winning this competition and preserving that competitive advantage relative to China?
Well, I believe Iowa is looking at making sure that we have an agricultural program in every school in the state eventually. Am I saying that correctly, Senator Sumbach? Yes.
Ask the senators.
So, we are, I don't know how many generations removed from the farm now. The vast majority of the people in the state of Iowa live in a rural community or in a city. They don't understand what's happening out on the farm. If we have the opportunity to expose them to agriculture, and it doesn't just have to be production agriculture, but in the school system, that will broaden their opportunities and horizons there. It doesn't need to be how to plant a soybean. It could be horticulture, aquaculture. I had the opportunity to travel to Chile on a trade mission about a month ago. And, Chile, a mountainous country, they're the second largest producer of salmon in the world. And they want to buy U.S. soybeans, by the way, if we can get the price down there. So I don't know if they have a free trade, but that's one there too. So, but it's the opportunities that they do not know it exists, and they don't know what they don't know. So it's our responsibility as citizens to make sure that we are getting agriculture into the school system one way or another. And it used to be one of the largest FFA chapters was in Chicago. And how many dairy farmers or soybean farmers do you know in Chicago? So, the opportunities are there.
I think she's right. They're getting ag in front of schools and funding programs like FFA, like 4-H, opportunities for kids to get exposed to real things. And it doesn't have to be all ag either. Those are foundational groups that just give you the skill sets to be competitive and learn new things and try new things. So, and speaking from a guy who's trying to raise a bunch of money to build an extension building for the 4-H program, we need money. I mean, we're strapping together and having to consolidate all the time in those type of programs. So any federal help we could get would be very well used, and I think would serve the youth and helping them learn more.
Yeah. I also think, showing kids that, ag nowadays, it's not, in Wisconsin, it's no longer a mom and pop 50 cow dairy. It's a highly technologically advanced enterprise. We're seeing robotics being used, particularly in a lot of our more innovative farms, drones, doing all sorts of things in terms of surveying fields, sampling soil health. And I think that's really, really attractive to the younger generation as well.
And NASA, we have a great astronaut from right here in Iowa, from Cedar Falls, Rajachari. He just commanded a mission to the International Space Station just a few years ago. And Raja, great name. Yeah. But he was just actually here talking a few weeks ago with us. We did a panel in Grinnell about the work that NASA is doing to help support agriculture as well, because they can look at things from space. Literally, they can have a different view, an out of this world view of Iowa agriculture, to put it mildly. But they can tell where water's going. They can tell how we can continue to innovate with precision agriculture. So when you talk about that public-private partnership, that's where I see that kind of innovation really helping to support the farmer, while at the same time letting you do what you do best, which is your land, literally down to the GPS mapping of your land, using that amazing tech that's been developed over many, many years. And I think we need to do everything we can to support both sides of that. That takes me to my next question, which is about protecting that innovation. What are you doing either in your industries or as organizations to have conversations with your colleagues about protection? Do you have trainings or classes to make sure that you're protecting your computer systems? Because obviously those can be vulnerable to hacking, especially our small businesses. What are you doing to make sure that you're protecting your own innovation and your own businesses? Will?
I gave that question a lot of thought on the way over here because, I mean, the shorter answer is we're not doing a lot from my perspective. I mean, granted, small family business, we're not generating a lot of IP. I mean, obviously the corporate companies generating the traits and the chemistries and stuff do, but, and I'm out of my depth here, but, I think it's a lot of education, just understanding what's at risk and what we can do about it. Because most general people still are trying to understand the cloud, let alone intellectual property, what can disappear. I learned a lot in just the opening statements here on what was actually potentially going on. People don't know that, and I think it comes down, if you see something, say something, which goes back to the initial thing that started this whole thing. They saw a couple guys digging up seeds in a field, and oddly enough, I learned just the other day that one of our employees was part of that team that found those guys 10 years ago. It's just, if you see something out of place, say something and speak up.
Can I go back to the ethanol issue? How does that play into the relationship with China? Is that something that they're trying to get into as well? Or do we know? And can you just give me your thoughts on ethanol?
I know they have built ethanol plants. I'm not qualified to speak, on that. They also have the bio, where it's not grain ethanol, but biomass ethanol also. I don't know how successful they are. I can't speak to that.
So kind of where I took that question, and I was thinking about that too, because one of the neat opportunities with soybeans is the biofuel potential that's coming. I mean, there's talk that we may be a net importer of soybeans in the Midwest if all this biofuel takes off like they think it could, which that's what ethanol did for corn. It provided an alternative market. We didn't have to rely on export markets. We were able to use it domestically, which then, of course, reduced our need for foreign oil as well. So it all works together. So if we can help fund alternative uses than just sending our soybeans over the ocean to go to other people, which is not a bad thing because you got to feed the world somehow too. But if we can keep more of this home and help add value to our own value chain here and replace things that we have to import, I think ethanol did that, and biofuels are a way to do that with soybeans as well. And you could probably speak more to that.
I'll just echo what Will said here. Biofuels are a great opportunity. It's exciting to be a soybean farmer right now just because of renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel. Those are great opportunities for our farmers across the Midwest who are producing soybeans or corn for that matter. But it's also national security. We don't have to look elsewhere for as much oil. We have it here in the United States. We can keep it here, and we're adding value to our products as well. I'd much rather keep our dollars here as much as possible.
My perception, though my grandpa had a farm, but I'm not a farmer, and I've never been a farmer that has done business in China. But my perception is that our relationship is non-reciprocal. So for Chinese businesses or entities in general that want to get access to the American market, do business here, we're pretty wide open. I mean, we've had some reform of the CFIUS process. We're starting to pay attention to things like suspicious land purchases. The Smithfield purchase by a big Chinese entity got a lot of attention and called into question the robustness of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. But if you're an American trying to do business in China, you faced a host of obstacles. It is certainly not as wide open as it is here. I don't know if any of you could speak to that non-reciprocal relationship. Anyone you do business with that has done business in China, the obstacles they face there? Because I think as a matter of principle, what most people agree on is that we should operate from the principle of reciprocity. There should be a level playing field. And so if they're going to impose restrictions on us, we can do the same to them. That's just a matter of fairness that I think your average American understands. Does that make sense?
It makes perfectly good sense. We need to have a fair, level playing field, but beyond that, I cannot speak on that.
Fair enough.
I would agree. I don't do business directly with China. I think you might be better suited to talk to the American Grains Council or something like that, or American Seed Trade Association, who does deal with more of that. I think those are some excellent resources that could give you some more answers to those type of questions.
I'll plant the seed today and get an answer. Boom. Got you there. Yeah.
I have a quick follow-up because Suzanne, you gave us kind of a to-do list, right? You gave us your top 5, and I would just pose a question because the one that really struck me, since we've had a lot of conversations about the potential trade markets here today. How have you utilized market access programs and kind of the programs that exist within the federal government to help reach those markets? And what barriers exist within those programs? Can we make it easier for not only to access them, but to use them?
I'll go ahead. I already kind of alluded to it in Cambodia, the American Soybean Association, as well as the United Soybean Board, and then states associations like Iowa. We invest in a program called WISH, which is the World Initiative for Soy in Human Health. But it's gone beyond just having people eat or use soy for human consumption. Now we're to the point where we're going into different countries that show potential to teach them, or I should say, help them learn how to efficiently grow their products and then market their products as well, with the intention of getting in there and bringing them on as an importer of U.S. soybeans. I spent 10 days there in Cambodia, visiting with researchers in the universities and farmers out in the field, walking up their ponds. I refused to walk in one, but I right up to the edge there with them to look at their fish and stuff, and they're excited. They want to do business with the U.S. So I do not administer those programs from the side of the soybean associations. However, I see the vast benefit we are getting from this. It's amazing. We need to do more of it, and that's how it's how we can get away from the amount of stronghold China has on us in our markets.
Well, and it can counter misinformation too. I think that's an important element here. We spent a lot of time talking about the relationship with Taiwan as well. Taiwan dealt very recently with a lot of Chinese misinformation about American pork products. And what we don't want is for that misinformation to spread, that propaganda to spread, because ultimately that makes us less competitive and erodes the trust in American produced, whether it's pork, soybeans, corn, or any agricultural commodity that we want to sell in those regions. That's very important.
And the more we're over there communicating with them in their countries, they grow to trust us more. They enjoy being around us. They are learning. It's a good way to start a good relationship down the road.
Okay. Do we want to do audience or press questions, or what's?
Does anybody in the audience have a question? I guess.
Senators. You want to grill us?
No.
Turn the tables on the feds here. Yeah. 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 Yep. Suzanne, you mentioned Vietnam. I went there a couple of years ago. I was blown away by having never been before. I mean, just think about our history, but they have such a positive view of Americans. I happened to go there when John McCain was still alive. He gave us a tour of the Hanoi Hilton. It was one of the more powerful experiences of my life. And everywhere he went, he was mobbed as like a rock star. It was wild. But Vietnam, you mentioned Chile. I agree. I mean, we got to be in the business of opening foreign markets.
GM is processing uranium they have the plants, they're processing and shipping byproducts, which will feed people in the other countries.
Yeah.
I think the answer is they cannot copy and paste the land. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And they've probably thought about that, Ashley. But I think you can copy and paste a house, you can copy and paste, a lot of things, but there are certain things that are intrinsic, right? And the most fascinating thing to me as I was just sitting listening to all of you talk is for 40 years or more, they have been, importing, millions and millions and millions of tons of soy and corn and other exports. They don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. In every other industry, they have basically taken whatever has been imported, copied it, rearranged it, and then set up their own operation, and then they export it to the rest of the world. But they just were never able to do that with your crops. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind about, like Mike was saying, I think there's something special about our freedom to think, innovate, be rebellious spirits, think outside the box, and to reward those innovations, right? Through your hard work should be rewarded. That's our free enterprise system. And those are certain things. If you don't buy into those things, it's really hard to mimic this success. So we always have to protect that secret sauce, which is the American, what I would call the American way.
Completely agree with all that. Would have been great presidential stump speech right there. One thought, I can't speak to the quality of the land in China, but there is this massive campaign to develop arable land wherever it exists underway by the Chinese Communist Party. So in some cases, they're taking condos or luxury resorts and they're redesignating it for agricultural use. You've had people that had reports in a certain Chinese promise of a guy who had a daffodil farm that was bulldozed overnight. So Xi Jinping, to your point, is trying to develop every piece of arable land he has in China in an effort, in my opinion, to wean. They know they're food insecure, so they don't want to be food insecure. And particularly if he's preparing for a potential showdown with the West over Taiwan, he needs to reduce that insecurity before it's too late. Again, I don't know anything about the quality of the soil and the land, but that's happening in China right now.
But that's where American innovation and seed can counter. We have a variety of soil qualities all over, even my district here in Iowa. You have sandier soil when you get up northeast, and it's much different here in Dysart and Tama County than it is in Clayton and Alameda County. So that's where that technology and that innovation is so critical to protect, because that does give us the upper hand, especially as they're trying to change, and they may be too late to do it, but they are certainly going to try. And I think that should be a kind of a warning shot to all of us about what their long-term intention is. And Raja's right. They don't want to have to be reliant upon us. They want it the other way around. And
it's why the CCP is all over South America and countries like Brazil, inking agreements for ag access, as well as in an effort to de-dollarize the global economy too. We're neglecting our own backyard, right? We've become very comfortable with, the legacy of the Monroe Doctrine and complacent as a result. Yes. God's country, we call it.
For your dirt, you said?
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah. Well, we also have some colleagues who are alive during the glacial period, so they can they have special expertise that we could leverage. Yeah, Senator. Are those Army Corps projects or?
Yes.
And
Yeah. So
bipartisan.
yes, and it was.
both funded with-
It was partially funded in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but also through the appropriations process last year, we were able to secure some funding. I worked with Sherry Bustos, who has since retired, but obviously had the district right across the Mississippi River. And what the senator, is referring to, I mean, when you think about our inland waterways and the access that gives us to those markets, right? We can talk about all these programs all we want, but that stuff still has to get from A to B. And making sure that we continue to protect and invest in that is absolutely critical. Mike mentioned what the Chinese are doing around the world. Obviously, they have their Belt and Road Initiative, which we tend to think of in terms of traditional infrastructure, but this is infrastructure that matters as well. So I think it's absolutely important that we talk about not only how we increase the number of places that you can sell your products, but we make sure we protect what it takes to get it there.
They have their Belt and Road. We need our Boat and Road initiative. We need to make sure those boats, those long boats, get down the Mississippi. And I'm thankful that Ashley worked with Sherry and Democrats and Republicans came together on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Now we just have to implement it all as quickly as possible. And I was just going to say, this kind of, we're going to be formulating our reports, right? Our economic competitiveness reports. We should be talking about this like as quickly as possible to implement what we've already passed, because upping our own game is part of our competition with China, right? I mean, their infrastructure is like second to none. We can get there if we do it together.
Other thoughts?
Representative Marty, you mentioned what I would ask.
Call me
of-
Raja.
Raja, thank you.
He makes me call him representative.
You asked, what would I ask of a president candidate? It would be free trade. Free trade agreements, because that opens up everything else as being a possibility. When you have free trade, you're moving, cash is flowing, moving back and forth. Well, that produces money that can go into our infrastructure more and more. As Senator Zumba alluded to, our river system needs help. I live 4 miles from the Mississippi. Over 50% of my corn and 100% of my soybeans go down the river for international markets. So it's detrimental that we get a move on. I think it's Lock and Dam 25 is the one that's getting renovated, and that's great, but we need to got to keep moving. It's easier to repair than replace.
Yeah.
So anything we can do to improve would be great.
I'm just curious, what do the presidential candidates say in response when you ask them to do that?
I haven't asked anyone lately.
Because I'm in both of our parties, this is a very complicated discussion now, all of a sudden. And so I'd be curious, like how, people respond, because that's a very real challenge for you.
Well, and you talk about education, right? And how important that is. I mean, that goes for the people who want to run this country too, because not all of them are from Iowa or Illinois or Wisconsin. And, we have a duty, I think, obviously here in Iowa, I like to say we pick presidents, which is an important part of the process. But I think it comes down to the true role of educating policymakers, not just in Congress, which we're trying to do. Obviously, we are trying to talk to our colleagues and make sure that we're making informed decisions, but that goes for the executive branch. Not every USDA person in Washington, D.C. who's behind a desk has had a conversation with you about this impact. So that's where, this feedback is really, really important and enables us to go back and be, make sure that we're developing policies that are actually going to work for you and work for our country too.
I'd like to see an increase in funding of MAP and farm market development in the Farm Bill. And the other thing is with ChemChina and Smithfield, I think when those go through, the Justice Department or whatever, those really need to be scrutinized harder now. Because while the corn theft happened, now they're buying it and it's being allowed. And, they used to buy our soybeans and now they own the hogs. I mean,
Yep. That's right.
There's a change in market there, and the government's the one that goes through those, not the farmers.
Interesting.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
Like we've said a million times, our land is our biggest resource right now. And they're buying it kind of secretively through real estate trusts or shell companies or what ways I don't understand, but it's happening. It needs to be stopped.
What about access to the technology that we're surrounded by these amazing machines? And Suzanne, you talked a little bit about, wanting to make sure that you can pass this on to the next generation. How do you think innovation in the technology space is helping us to maintain our competitive advantage in the global ag arena, so to speak?
I think just mostly through efficiency. We've got infrastructure. We've got the equipment available. We've got knowledge, competitive. We've got a lot of, most people don't understand the combines almost drive themselves. It's really a lot more high tech than people realize.
Are there barriers to access? I mean, do you find there are barriers to some farmers to access that technology? Is it cost? Supply chain? I mean, because we've heard a lot about that in the past few years as well.
It was very expensive. I think that's the biggest barrier to the next generation in agriculture is the extreme cost to be in production ag. I mean, the first number's a very big one on this combine, and I probably couldn't get it right. It's more than a house.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not all that you need. You need the planter and the tractor and the shed and
So from a competitive standpoint though, so this is where being competitive with China, this is an important conversation because they don't have any barriers to giving that money away, right? They're just going to, as a government, invest those dollars where they need to be competitive. Whereas our system, obviously, rightfully so, it's a system of opportunity, but we have to do everything we can to help support that innovation to drive down the cost. You talk a lot about input costs, right? And we've certainly had a lot of conversations about that over the last few years about, where your margins are and how tight they are. But I think access to precision ag technology could help us be competitive. Is that fair to say?
yes.
Oh, it
More
has
competitive?
made us competitive. Yes, it has. And you also have to take in mind there are fewer people living in rural Iowa. And so this amazing combine makes it easier for fewer people to harvest just as much or more land than they did 20, 30 years ago. So yes, technology is very important to any farm operation. So.
Good. With that, unless there's any saved rounds, why don't we give our amazing panelists a hand?
Yes.
Yay.
Round of applause. Great. Thank you. Any final thoughts, Ashley, Raja?
I would just close by saying I think that I trust my farmers to give me the real truth. Thank you for being here today to tell us, how these programs are really going to impact you. Continue that feedback with us because as we enter into not only the Farm Bill conversations, which hopefully we'll have moving here in the next couple of months, but longer term, when our committee is making these recommendations, we want to make sure, and I echo this, we want to make sure we get it right. Not only does the future of our agriculture industry here in this country depend on it, but clearly other people's futures in other countries depend on access to our products too. So thank you for being here, Raja.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your hospitality, Ashley and Youngblood Ag. And I want to say, you know, if you look up the definition of Iowa nice in the dictionary, I think those three people kind of
Yes.
would be portrayed there. I don't know how many times, Suzanne, you said the word please in your opening statement. I lost count. That word doesn't show up in Washington, D.C. very often. So it's like a foreign word. But in all seriousness, it's really refreshing to hear people talk about issues from their lived experience as opposed to kind of speculating or guessing what's out there. I think just going back to what the three of us have said, I think everybody said it, but not everyone has said it yet, which is what you have in Iowa is special. And people around the world are trying to copy it. Of course, we're focused on the CCP, but I don't think they can ever copy it if we are vigilant about our secrets, our research, and we keep our way of doing business and the way that we operate. Our operating system, if you will. Our operating system is about freedom. It's about free enterprise. It's about making sure every person is productive and educated. And if we can do that better or as well as anyone else in the world, we're going to do just fine. But we can't be anything but vigilant because we are in a global competition. This is a competition that will determine kind of our standard of living, our children's standard of living for generations. And so the stakes are about as high as they can be. And so I just want to thank our dear leader, Mike Gallagher, and Ashley for convening us. Dear leader kind of sounds like Kim Jong-un a little bit, so I better withdraw that.
Would the gentleman rephrase?
I'm going to take down my words.
Fine.
But our dear chairman, and thank you for bringing us to Iowa.
Well, thank you. What happens if you look up Illinois nice in the dictionary? What? Is there even an entry? Or? Well, first of all, I want to say thank you again to Youngblood, our panelists, to Iowa. What a great state. It's amazing and refreshing to be here. By the way, we drafted an Iowa boy, Packers. We got Lucas Van Ness, the Van Ness Monster. I'm trying to popularize that nickname. We'll see how he does. Ashley, you're an incredible representative for this area and just an incredible member of the committee, and so it's really great to be here in your home area. Raja, thank you for the bipartisan spirit and just the intellectual firepower you bring to all these debates. I think of the many goals we have on this committee, you know, we want to put forward policy recommendations that prevent a war with China in the near term and improve our ability to win this competition for the long term. But I think kind of lurking beneath all of that is this goal of connecting the policy debates that we have in DC just to the lives of average Americans, right? And oftentimes when we talk about China, the discussion can be dominated by people sitting in think tanks in DC or, you know, in executive branch office building or in the halls of Congress, but that's not really where the center of gravity of the competition is. And I would submit that's not where the wellspring of wisdom is in this country. It's right here in the Midwest. It's why it's important we do events like this. And while the people on the left and the West and the East Coast could call this flyover country, I tend to think it's the source of American strength, or at least here is where people still have common sense and decent values. So thank you, Iowa, for having us. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. Thank you. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you. This is great.
Yes.